I'm going to dive into a couple of these questions, and please, anybody jump in. So don't feel like you have to hang back. One just quick clarifying question. I think you talked about this a little bit, DA Garza, but does the DA's office actually do the investigation, or have you been able to build law enforcement relationships to have law enforcement do those investigations?
Stephanie, you want to take that one? I'll say generally that we have some limited capacity to conduct investigations on our own. But Steph, you want to speak to the details of this one?
Similarly, most of the cases that are in our pipeline so far are cases that we are investigating in-house, and we are just actively working through some of our other partnerships with other governmental entities to really build out that investigation infrastructure externally as well.
Another question just on context. So Fabiola, you talked about wage theft as the most prevalent type of theft. And I'll say, we think that 20%, 1 in 5 workers is undercounting. I'm sure you've seen that too, just because that, so many people don't report at all. But why do you think there are such disparities in enforcement and media coverage of wage theft versus other types of theft? And anybody can jump in here. I have some theories myself.
Yeah, no, everybody please jump in. I am still trying to think about why that is, right? Partially, I want to say that it's how we value labor. Lots of people believe that, especially that our value is expendable or that our labor is expendable. And so therefore, if somebody's wages are stolen, what does that matter, right? What matters is, things that are mostly televised, right? And so I think it's that we need to start reckoning with how we value each other's labor, how we value ourselves as workers, as people. And so that's my immediate reaction to that. I don't know if Jeremy, Steph, or DA Garza has anything that they want to add.
I will build on that a little bit. Unfortunately, we see this every day in the construction industry, the fact that people are looked at like commodities. Honestly, there are contractors that get more upset when wood is stolen off their job site than if someone gets hurt or dies on their job site, which is just shocking, but it's absolutely true. And so we've really, as Fabi said, we've got to change that narrative out there that, we value labor. And the way we do that is through enforcing and making sure that the people violating these laws are being punished, because we really have to value the workers first and the hard work that they do to build this city. And everyone loves a ribbon cutting, but no one wants to know really all the people that got hurt or injured in the process of building those tall, shiny buildings downtown. So that's really why this is so important.
Yeah, I think it's also just really important to acknowledge the racial and gender and other intersectional issues at play here, a huge proportion, a disproportionate number. Please go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to take that issue on directly. And I think we should, we have to remember that for well over 100 years in this country, we have been told that what public safety is locking up as many working class people and people of color as we can. It is why we have the highest incarceration rates in the world, why we incarcerate more people than China, and why for anyone who has ever spent time in our prisons and jails can see that our jails are filled not with the wealthy, not with the middle class, but they are filled with working class and working poor, predominantly with people of color. And the crime of wage theft challenges our tightly held perceptions of who are victims, what is crime, and who are perpetrators of crime. And I think we need to just challenge that directly and call it out.
Are there other industries where you see this as being especially prevalent in Travis County or across Texas, and anyone can jump in?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is like wage theft is not something that only happens in one industry or only happens around certain sectors of our workforce. It's really very widespread. And so, other industries that come to mind are the service sector, custodial, and we know, it's not limited there. I think It's also important to mention, we've talked a lot about wage theft among folks who are undocumented, but folks who are documented are also victims of wage theft. I saw that there were some other questions around stats, et cetera. And I will just say that for as long as I've done this work, and we haven't asked about status in our intake process because we know that your rights to get paid the wages that are owed to you are not dependent on whether you have papers or not. That doesn't matter under, the civil laws that I used to enforce when I was a legal services attorney. And it's certainly not something that impacts your rights to receive your wages under the criminal statutes that I'm now enforcing as an ADA. And so I just want to make it really loud and clear that your rights to receive wages that you are promised is not dependent on your status. And our office is committed to really investigating and prosecuting all sorts of wage theft cases, regardless of the status of the victim in those instances.
Yeah. Just sticking on that issue for a second, how do you think about unintended consequences for undocumented workers? There's a question about this. For example, an employer may switch from cash payroll to a payroll processor based on enforcement, and then as a result might only hire people who can be paid through payroll. How do you think about those kinds of potential unintended consequences for undocumented workers?
Unfortunately, one argument that I've been hearing recently as we've been talking about building this infrastructure in our community is this myth that actually enforcing these laws will end up harming some of the most vulnerable members of our community. And I think it's important for us to remember the broader context of the labor enforcement legal schemes that we work under. And that context is really built upon the fact that we are all worse off if there are different kind of classes of workers, where we have, a documented class that is on the books and an undocumented class that is off the books. All workers are guaranteed the same rights under law, because we know that it hurts all workers if there is a segment of our workforce that can more easily be exploited. That not only harms those who are exploited, it harms the rest of us, right? So I think it's really important to mention that we know that we have a broken immigration system. We know that makes it really hard for employers who are trying to meet real labor needs right now. All workers deserve to be treated with dignity and respect at work. All workers deserve to be paid the wages that are owed to them, but you are not entitled to violate the law or misclassify workers that you employ just because you perceive those workers to have one status or not. And if you have questions about that, I suggest that you consult with your tax attorney. But I think that's just that we've been hearing a lot that really needs to be dispelled, particularly in our community.
Yeah, and I think it's important to call that out as something that that's an argument that's used across exploitative business practices, right? We've seen it. I saw it earlier in my years as an attorney with the payday lending industry and predatory lending or banks and other organizations, where the argument was if you actually force people to treat consumers fairly in their loans and stop charging illegal, predatory, 40% rates, 400% interest rates, et cetera, that would, deprive low-income folks of access to credit. And so I think you see this story over and over where it's an argument that is used to protect corporate power, frankly, and protect sort of a caste system in the workplace and the marketplace. So I appreciate you calling that out.
And we should also just cut right to the core of what the essence of that argument is, which is that exploiting vulnerable workers is for their own good. That's essentially the crux of the argument. And we should just listen to working people who, and our own common sense, but particularly to working people who will tell us that it's not true.
Yeah. So there have been a couple of questions about labor trafficking and what happened. How do you think about cases when they actually sort of cross over into a labor trafficking issue? Do you collaborate with anti-labor trafficking groups or agencies? If you have any comments on that, of just like how to think about wage theft and labor trafficking.
So, I mean, we I am housed at the DA's office within the white collar crime unit, and I have the privilege of working alongside another ADA in our office who is our designated trafficking prosecutor. So our office is plugged into a broader regional task force that focuses on trafficking issues. We know that oftentimes wage theft is a symptom of labor trafficking, right? There are instances in which wage theft happens on its own. And then certainly in the trafficking context, wage theft often also happens. And so I will just say that our office, just as we are committed to wage theft enforcement, we are equally committed from the conversations that I've had, with DA Garza and making sure that we are supporting and seeking justice for victims of labor trafficking as well. DA Garza, if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's perfect. Absolutely.
Great. I have a couple other questions around your state Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Are you able to use that state law for folks who aren't in the weeds as lawyers on this Zoom? Every state has some version of an unfair and deceptive acts and practices law or unfair competition law. They vary a lot by state, but every state has at least some form of a Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Is that something that you're able to use along with the criminal statutes, or is that something that other agencies might use?
Let me just say, generally speaking, that there are a number of statutes that prohibit conduct related to wage theft. And we are exploring and intend to use every single tool available to us.
Yeah, I think that's really important because especially for folks on the call who are joining from other jurisdictions, and you mentioned this earlier in terms of needing to test and demonstrate that you actually had jurisdiction to do this work. This is such a common thing where if an office or agencies haven't used power that they have before, it's often a question from risk-averse lawyers. Do we actually have this power if we've never used it before? And so sometimes people want to look for the really specific, wage theft statute that is directly on point. But often there are more general laws that can also be used, like your unfair trade practices, like larceny, like other, sort of general purpose fraud and unfair competition laws. So just for folks from other places who may not have won all of the policy victories that the Travis County Coalition has, there are likely other options.
And just one example of that, for instance, is theft by check. We have seen a lot of these cases that involve a worker being paid with a check that has insufficient funds or comes from a closed account. And I do think that that's a common occurrence, and not a common occurrence, but it's one of the ways that wage theft manifests itself. And most jurisdictions do have criminal statutes that speak to those sorts of cases.
There's another question about, is there a systemic way to find and build relationships with local groups to do this work? Thinking about advice to other jurisdictions. This person does this as they come into contact, but it can feel sort of ad hoc. So any advice about doing, organized outreach to community groups in your jurisdiction?
As I try to answer that question, I want to acknowledge another question that was in the chat. Which made the point that these issues are oftentimes far less prevalent on unionized workforces amongst unionized workers, and that is so key and so important for us to remember the strength and power that workers wield when they are a part of a union. We have worked in many capacities to increase opportunities for workers to join unions throughout Austin and Central Texas. I am proud as district attorney to have supported several organizing campaigns that are underway here in Travis County. And so just to transition from that to the question you asked, every single jurisdiction in the country has a local labor movement, has a building trades, there is a LIUNA or another construction trade and other unions that represent workers in other sectors of the economy. It's a great place to start. We are very fortunate here in Austin to have a vibrant worker center as well. And increasingly, many jurisdictions also have worker centers like Workers Defense Project. And so those are two great places to start. I'll also note that here in Austin, we have robust engagement from our faith community around this issue. And so I think those are three places that every jurisdiction should start with right off the bat: their local labor movement, their local worker center if they've got one, and their faith community.
Jeremy, Fabiola, Stephanie, or Jose Garza, if you see any other questions that you really want to address, please go ahead and jump in.
Jill, I just wanted to add something to the conversation. One of the things that Workers Defense Project has done really well is add to what was already happening when it comes to building and trades union, being able to get onto job sites and monitor job sites, to talk to workers. And really, they've built on that, what we do every day as organizers in the field, and really come up with a Better Builder program, which was mentioned earlier, that has a monitoring component. And that monitoring component is huge, because you think this is only happening on private jobs where they're building, some ratty non-union thing. But unfortunately, a lot of government projects also suffer from these. Some of our biggest instances that we've discovered locally were on the Austin airport and we're on the Travis County Courthouse, where misclassification led to hundreds of thousands of dollars in wage theft. And so that monitoring component is, and we can see the stark difference between a project that is monitored and one that is not, and the amount of violations. So that's just another component that I think is critical to this, and hats off to Workers Defense for really joining the trades and really building on what we were already doing every day just through our jobs, and making it kind of the community standard.
And I mean, to kind of talk about community organizing again, and going back to a bunch of relationships that we do have, I do want to say, like, it takes a long time. It really does take a long time to create trust within the community. And so I know that there's, a desire and a goodwill to want to be able to create these relationships quickly and start having, a two-way dialogue. However, because of whatever reason in the past, and power structures that are in place, how people view government authorities, it often takes a long time to be able to effectively create these relationships. And so I really do encourage folks on this call to play the long game, to be able to effectively create these changes in the long term. And as for, there's a question on here about how our local work relates to immigrant rights organizing. I mean, I'll speak on Workers Defense, but we are involved in the immigrant rights work. I mean, locally in Texas, we have fought against anti-immigrant legislation, including Senate Bill 4, aka our Show Me Your Papers bill. We are a part of coalitions nationwide, and we're trying to find ways to be able to intersect that work with our current labor organizing as well, because at the end of the day, that's our bread and butter. We want to make sure that workers, specifically construction workers, are protected. And we've been able to find an outlet with another organization, Endalon, and we're currently working with them to try to create further change within the state of Texas. And we're really excited about where we're going. So, it just takes a long time, everyone. So just keep that in mind as you continue to organize and, do all your good work.
It took a long time to build this system, so it's going to take a long time to redo it. Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that, this is also work that we're building, and we're building it together. And as I am, building new community relationships, or really reconnecting with relationships that I had coming into this role, I think I'm just really trying to be honest about that, and inviting people to kind of learn alongside us. I know each time that we see a new case, we are learning something new about what it means to do this work on the criminal side. And we have really benefited from being part of a broader kind of learning community with other ADA offices, AG's offices across the country that are building out these initiatives and models within their own offices. And so there's really a vibrant learning community across the country that is delving into these issues. And I just say, I think one of the things that really led me to do this work inside our office was because it became clear to me that in order for our local DA's office to be effective in this work, we really needed people to take that step from kind of like the movement world into the public sector. And I would have never thought, 2 or 3 years ago that I would ever call myself an assistant district attorney. But having that experience doing this work on the civil side with directly impacted communities has, I think, made my transition into the DA's office and launching this work a lot easier. And that requires a bit of a culture shift, but I think that that's sometimes something that folks who have worked more on the outside need to do at times to help these offices really be effective in carrying out the work that leaders like DA Garza really want to do in our communities.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Stephanie. I mean, I think you really just articulated like why Public Rights Project exists, which is, we really believe that if we're going to change the way government does its work and the way that government exercises its power, then the people who actually occupy positions of power in government have to change. We have lots of amazing advocates who are organizing on the outside to change the way government does its work, and that is critical. But we also need to change who's on the inside working with advocates and change the way that government power is actually harnessed and used for the communities that we're supposed to be serving. So thank you for doing that thing that you thought would be unthinkable just a few years ago and taking a position in government. And thank you for your service. So there are lots of questions and I think we've covered most of them. I think there are folks talking about just some really creative ways to think about wage theft. I know using extortion was mentioned in the chat, particularly with respect to immigrant workers. There have been other mentions of just creative uses of other existing laws. So I just want to really thank everybody for your engagement in the chat. I know we're getting close to the end. So I just want to make sure that all of our speakers have an opportunity to share some closing thoughts with folks. We have law students here. We have folks in government service across the country in lots of different offices, DAs, city attorneys, agencies, state government. We have community advocates and others. So what's your advice for folks who are looking to follow their lead, who are looking to really build up their workers' rights enforcement work in their communities? I'll start with you, DA Garza.
I think my first piece of advice is that folks should really be willing to go where they're needed. I started my career in a 30,000 person town on the Texas-Mexico border. Steph, who went to school in the Midwest and on the East Coast, came down to Texas because this is where the fight was. And so, I think it's really important for everyone who is aspiring to have a career in public service to go where they're needed. You'll get the most experience that way, and you will do the most good that way. There are lots of really amazing attorneys, and with much respect to our friends in New York and LA and Chicago, and there may be need there too. But there are many places across the country that will never have the benefit of an advocate or attorney like the folks in this fellowship, like the people who are in law school who may be listening. That's my first bit of advice, is be willing to go where you're needed.
Stephanie, what about you? What's your advice?
I don't know if I have great advice. I think I'm just, I feel really lucky to be in this role after having worked directly with, folks who are impacted by wage theft and other labor violations for so long, because I've been shaped by their experiences, their stories, and inspired by them. And it's really impossible for me to think about doing this work without having developed those relationships and really having had the opportunity to be transformed by their stories and their courage. So I think having that sort of footing and foundation has been very important to me personally.
Jeremy, what about you?
I guess Jose kind of stole my best advice earlier, and that's join a union. Because obviously folks in our union don't have to deal with wage theft. They don't have to deal with a lot of these issues that folks in the non-union sector do. So that's my first bit of advice. But the other thing I'll say is, although everyone that has worked on this in Austin, there's a lot of folks not on this call that have worked on it for years. Although we're all very special, passionate people, it is not lightning in a bottle. We've proven that you can do this in the hardest of places through hard work, through getting members involved, through having people tell their stories, through knocking doors, through making phone calls, all the things it takes to do that legislative advocacy, the political advocacy, and then really get to the point of not just making laws, but enforcing them with the right people. And so, I just say get to work. That's my best advice.
Fabiola, what about you?
Yeah, I also don't believe that I have the best advice other than get to work. But I think for me, I really do want to highlight the need for directly impacted people to be at the forefront of this. We have a lot of lawyers here. We have a lot of public servants here, and I commend your work. And I really appreciate you all coming in here to speak on this. But at the end of the day, the people who know most and who know best are those that are directly impacted. So yes, get in touch with your labor unions. Yes, get in touch with your worker centers, get in touch with advocates, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are, at the forefront. They're the ones that are bearing the brunt of all of the inequities that are going on in our system today. And the only way that we can truly combat this is by continuing to build worker power. And so I really do encourage that to happen within the nation so we can make it a better place.
Absolutely. I also just really want to acknowledge Ryan in the chat and others. Stephanie and DA Garza are new to the DA's office, but we have a lot of folks on this call and, my prior career as well, who are in public service already and who really want to do good work and have a public service mindset and a public interest mindset. And so I think this is again one of the reasons why I created Public Rights Project, is that on the one hand, we don't have enough folks that have direct experience with the kinds of harms that we're talking about here in positions of power in government. We need to change the pipeline into public service, but we also need to change the amount of support and resources that we bring to the incredible public servants who are already serving in government. We do provide support for offices across the country to help them build workers' rights enforcement and other, equitable enforcement units. So we're about to launch recruitment for our mid-career fellowship, which is dedicated directly at those public servants who are already in government but need professional development, training, access to a network of other folks who are interested in doing this work across the country. So please get in touch with us if you're interested in that program, or if you're interested in working with us on any other cases. You want help thinking through how to build your first case. We're about to launch other resources later this year to really help folks who are trying to do great work in government offices across the country. And our mission is to really support you and help you build the pipeline of great cases that address your community's needs, like the Travis County DA's office is doing. All right, thank you all so much. This was an amazing discussion. I really appreciate all of your time. Kristen, I will kick it back to you to close us out.
Of course, thank you all for joining us here today. A big round of applause to our panelists. I think we can all agree this was a great discussion. I learned a lot. I'm sure we all did. Thanks for everyone for attending our case study on fighting for economic justice and really breaking down why wage theft enforcement is key to public safety. I'm just going to do one last plug. Sign up for our newsletter on publicrightsproject.org, or you can go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen. Be up to date on any upcoming events here at PRP and just stay in touch with us. Be sure to stay connected with us via social media as well. I dropped all of our social handles in the chat. Stay tuned for the video version that you can share with your network. And until next time, we hope you have a great weekend.